The city moved differently after midnight, quieter in some places, more dangerous in others. Alexander Steele understood this distinction better than most, having spent his entire adult life navigating both sides of that particular divide. He stepped out of the private meeting room on the building's top floor, his security detail falling into practice formation around him as they moved toward the elevator. Business had gone smoothly that night. Negotiations concluding exactly as he'd anticipated, with the shipping contracts his organization needed secured. Alexander felt the particular satisfaction of successful, careful planning as he walked through the quiet parking garage toward his waiting car, his mind already moving toward tomorrow's schedule of demands and decisions that came with running one of the city's most powerful criminal organizations. He never anticipated the evening taking the sudden, unexpected turn it did. As Alexander's group rounded the corner toward his car, a figure emerged unexpectedly from the shadows near the garage entrance, moving with the unsteady, desperate urgency of someone running from something far more frightening than simple lateness or confusion. The woman, dressed in torn clothing that suggested she'd been running through unfamiliar terrain for some time, stumbled directly into Alexander's path before her legs finally gave out completely beneath her. Alexander's instincts, sharpened by years of navigating unpredictable danger, caught her before she collapsed fully onto the concrete floor, his arms wrapping around her trembling frame with careful, practiced efficiency. "Someone get a medic," he said sharply to his security detail, his voice carrying the particular authority that ensured immediate compliance from everyone around him. The woman in his arms, barely conscious, lifted her face toward him briefly, and Alexander felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest at what he saw clearly, even in the garage's dim lighting. Bruises, several days old based on their yellowing edges, marked her cheek and jaw. Fresh cuts, still raw and clearly recent, ran along her forearm where her torn sleeve had ridden up during her desperate run. Her eyes, when they finally focused on his face, carried the particular hollow exhaustion of someone who had been genuinely terrified for far longer than tonight's obvious crisis alone could explain. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "don't let him find me." "Who?" Alexander asked, though the woman had already lost consciousness completely, her body going limp against his supporting arms. "Marcus." Alexander's head of security appeared quickly beside him, assessing the unconscious woman with professional efficiency. "Sir, we should call the police. This looks like—" "No," Alexander said sharply, surprising even himself with the immediate certain conviction in his refusal. "Not yet. Get the medic here immediately and prepare the car. We're taking her to the estate." Marcus studied his employer carefully, genuine surprise evident in his expression at this uncharacteristic deviation from Alexander's typically careful, calculated decision-making. "Sir, with respect, we don't know anything about this woman. Bringing an unknown stranger to the estate carries significant security risks." "I'm aware of the risks," Alexander said, his tone leaving no room for further argument despite Marcus's legitimate concerns. "Someone terrified her badly enough that she ran directly into a stranger's path rather than continuing to run from whatever danger she's facing. I'm not simply handing her over to police who might not properly protect her, or leaving her here to be found by whoever she's running from." Something in Alexander's uncharacteristically firm insistence made Marcus reconsider his objection. Despite his employer's reputation for calculated, unemotional decision-making in his dangerous business dealings, Marcus had witnessed occasional glimpses of a different man beneath that controlled exterior. Someone who occasionally allowed genuine compassion to override strict pragmatic calculation. "Understood." "Sir?" Marcus said finally, moving to arrange the necessary preparations. The estate's private medical suite, staffed around the clock by Dr. Patricia Reeves, a physician with considerable experience treating injuries that required discretion beyond typical hospital protocols, received the unconscious woman within 20 minutes. Alexander waited anxiously outside the treatment room, an unfamiliar sensation given his usual controlled patience during difficult business circumstances. "How is she?" he asked immediately when Dr. Reeves finally emerged, exhausted, dehydrated, and suffering from injuries consistent with prolonged, repeated physical abuse, Dr. Reeves said carefully, her professional tone carrying genuine concern beneath its clinical delivery. "The bruising pattern suggests this isn't an isolated incident, but rather ongoing abuse occurring over an extended period, likely months if not longer." Alexander felt genuine anger building in his chest at this confirmation of what he'd suspected from his first glimpse of her injuries. "Will she recover?" "Physically, yes, with proper rest and care," Dr. Reeves confirmed. "The psychological trauma will likely require considerably more extensive care and time to properly address." "Has she said anything about who did this to her?" Alexander asked. "Only briefly, while semi-conscious," Dr. Reeves said. "She mentioned someone named Victor, though nothing beyond that name, and repeated pleas not to be found." Alexander absorbed this information carefully, his sharp mind already working through the implications and potential dangers this unexpected situation might present, both to the unknown woman he'd rescued and potentially to his own organization if her abuser proved connected to circles he typically navigated within his dangerous business dealings. "I want to know everything about anyone named Victor connected to a woman matching her description," Alexander told Marcus quietly as they stood together outside the medical suite. "Discreetly but thoroughly." "Understood, sir," Marcus said, though genuine curiosity was evident in his careful expression. "May I ask why this particular situation has captured your attention so significantly?" "We encounter desperate people in this city regularly, sir. Given the nature of our business," Alexander considered the question carefully before answering, understanding even as he spoke that his own motivation remained somewhat unclear even to himself. "I don't fully know yet," he admitted quietly. "But something about the way she looked at me, genuine terror mixed with desperate hope that I might actually help rather than simply ignore her crisis. I couldn't turn away from that, Marcus. I won't pretend to fully understand why." As Alexander finally retired for the night, his thoughts remained fixed on the unconscious, injured stranger now resting in his estate's medical suite, uncertain exactly what circumstances had brought her so unexpectedly into his carefully controlled world, but genuinely determined to understand the full truth behind her obvious terror before allowing anyone to take her away from the safety he'd unexpectedly decided to provide. Grace woke slowly, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings that felt entirely different from anything she'd expected. Soft morning light filtered through tall windows into a room considerably more luxurious than anywhere she'd stayed in years. Comfortable bedding surrounding her, the quiet absence of the particular tension that had characterized her home for longer than she cared to remember. For a brief, confused moment, she wondered if she'd finally succumbed to the exhaustion and fear that had driven her desperate flight. Imagining this peaceful comfort as some kind of temporary escape her mind had constructed. Then the door opened quietly, and a woman in medical scrubs entered, her expression carrying professional warmth. "You're awake," Dr. Reeves said gently, checking Grace's vital signs with careful efficiency. "How are you feeling?" "Where am I?" Grace asked, her voice carrying genuine confusion and lingering fear. "You're safe," Dr. Reeves said carefully. "You collapsed last night, and the man who found you brought you here for proper medical care. He's waiting to speak with you if you feel ready." Grace's chest tightened with immediate alarm. "Who found me?" "Alexander Steele," Dr. Reeves said. "He's waiting outside, though he's instructed me to let you decide when or if you're ready to speak with him." The name meant nothing to Grace initially, though something about the careful respect in Dr. Reeves's tone suggested this Alexander Steele carried considerable significance within whatever household she now found herself residing. "I need to leave," Grace said suddenly, panic building rapidly as memories of her desperate flight returned fully. "Victor will be looking for me. If he finds out where I am, you're safe here," Dr. Reeves repeated firmly, gently preventing Grace from attempting to rise too quickly, given her body's continued exhaustion. "This estate has considerable security. Whoever this Victor is, he won't easily locate or reach you within these walls." Grace's breathing gradually slowed as the genuine conviction in Dr. Reeves's reassurance began settling into her exhausted, frightened mind. "I don't understand any of this," she admitted quietly. "Why would a stranger help me this way?" "That's a question you'll need to ask Mr. Steele directly," Dr. Reeves said. "Though I can tell you, in my considerable experience working within this household, he doesn't typically extend this kind of care towards strangers without genuine reason." After several more minutes of careful medical assessment confirming Grace's physical stability despite her obvious exhaustion, Dr. Reeves finally asked whether Grace felt ready to speak with the man who had rescued her the previous night. Grace hesitated, genuine fear warring against desperate curiosity about exactly who had intervened so decisively in her desperate flight. Finally, she nodded cautiously. "I suppose I should thank him properly, whatever this situation actually is." Alexander entered several minutes later, his tall, imposing presence filling the room despite his careful, measured movements clearly intended not to overwhelm her already fragile state. Grace studied him carefully, noting the expensive but understated clothing, the controlled, watchful expression that suggested considerable authority despite his gentle approach. "How are you feeling?" Alexander asked, settling into a chair positioned a respectful distance from her bed. "Confused," Grace admitted honestly. "And grateful, though I don't fully understand why you helped me." "You collapsed directly into my path last night," Alexander said simply. "I wasn't prepared to simply step over you and continue with my evening." Something in his straightforward, unpretentious explanation eased some of Grace's lingering caution. "Dr. Reeves said your name is Alexander Steele. I don't recognize it, though something about how carefully everyone here treats you suggests I probably should." Alexander's expression carried something between amusement and careful calculation. "Perhaps it's better you don't recognize my name immediately. It might change how comfortable you feel discussing your situation." "Why?" Grace asked, genuine curiosity overriding some of her exhaustion. "Because my business dealings aren't entirely conventional," Alexander said carefully. "I run an organization that operates outside typical legal boundaries. I understand if that revelation makes you uncomfortable, given you're already dealing with considerable danger and uncertainty." Grace absorbed this information slowly, surprising herself with how little genuine alarm it generated, compared to the persistent fear that had defined her recent existence. "At this point," she said quietly, "I'm not certain conventional legal boundaries have done particularly much to protect me from the danger I've been living with." Something shifted in Alexander's expression at her admission. "Tell me about that danger," he said gently. "Whatever you're comfortable sharing." Grace hesitated for a long moment, years of careful silence and enforced secrecy warring against genuine exhaustion with carrying this burden entirely alone. Finally, haltingly, she began explaining. "My husband Victor, he wasn't always like this," she said quietly. "When we first married, he was charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted. It changed gradually, so gradually I almost didn't notice, until I was already trapped within patterns I couldn't easily escape." Alexander listened without interrupting, his expression carrying genuine, focused attention rather than the impatient sympathy she'd occasionally encountered from others during rare moments of vulnerability. "The abuse started small," Grace continued. "Controlling comments, isolation from friends and family, financial control that made leaving seem practically impossible. Then it became physical, though he was always careful to ensure the injuries remained hidden beneath clothing, explainable through convenient excuses if anyone happened to notice." "How long has this continued?" Alexander asked quietly. 3 years, Grace said, her voice carrying genuine shame, despite the circumstances clearly beyond her control. I tried leaving twice before. Both times he found me within days, and the consequences afterward were considerably worse than whatever punishment I'd already been enduring. What happened last night specifically? Alexander asked carefully. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she recalled the previous evening's terror. He'd been drinking more heavily than usual. Something set him off. I honestly don't remember what specific trigger caused this particular episode. He became considerably more violent than previous incidents, and something inside me simply broke. I ran without any real plan, without any destination, simply desperate to escape before the situation became something I might not survive. Alexander's jaw tightened visibly at her explanation, genuine anger evident beneath his controlled exterior. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "Whatever resources or protection you require to ensure Victor never successfully locates or harms you again, I intend to provide." "Why?" Grace asked again, genuine confusion evident in her voice. "You don't know me. This isn't your responsibility." Alexander considered his answer carefully before responding. "Perhaps not conventionally," he acknowledged. "But I've built considerable power and resources throughout my life, Grace, often for purposes I'm not entirely proud of. Using that power to protect someone genuinely deserving of protection feels like exactly the kind of purpose that power should occasionally serve." Something in his quiet, genuine conviction settled deeply into Grace's exhausted, frightened heart. A fragile but genuine hope beginning to take root, despite years of learning not to trust promises of safety or protection. "Thank you," she said finally, genuine emotion evident in her voice. "I don't know how to properly express what your help means, given everything I've experienced recently." "You don't need to thank me extensively," Alexander said gently. "Simply focus on healing, on rebuilding whatever sense of safety and stability Victor's abuse has stolen from you. I'll handle the practical matters of ensuring your continued protection." As Alexander departed to begin the discreet investigation he'd already promised Marcus regarding Victor's identity and background, Grace remained in her comfortable, unfamiliar bed, cautiously allowing herself to consider for the first time in years that genuine safety and protection might actually be possible. Marcus returned to Alexander's office 3 days later, a thick folder in hand and an expression suggesting the information contained within carried considerably more significance than a simple background check on an abusive husband might typically warrant. "Victor Hale," Marcus said, setting the folder on Alexander's desk. "This took longer than expected because he's been remarkably careful about maintaining a clean, public profile." "What did you find beneath that careful profile?" Alexander asked, already sensing this investigation had uncovered something considerably more complicated than he'd initially anticipated. "He's connected to the Kozlov organization," Marcus said grimly. "Not directly employed by them, but he's been laundering money through his legitimate business, a chain of upscale restaurants, for approximately 2 years now." Alexander's expression sharpened considerably at this revelation. The Kozlov organization represented one of his more dangerous rivals within the city's complicated criminal landscape, an organization known for particularly ruthless tactics when protecting their interests. "How deeply is he involved?" Alexander asked. "Deeply enough that removing Grace from his life, or worse, discovering she's under your protection specifically, likely represents more than simple personal humiliation to him," Marcus said carefully. "If Kozlov discovers this connection, it potentially becomes a significant vulnerability they could exploit against your organization." Alexander absorbed this information carefully, understanding immediately the increased complexity this revelation introduced to what he'd initially considered a straightforward matter of protecting an innocent, abused woman from her dangerous husband. Does Victor know we're investigating him? Not yet, Marcus confirmed, though he's been actively searching for Grace since she disappeared. My sources indicate he's contacted several private investigators, offering substantial payment for information about her whereabouts. Has he connected her disappearance to us, specifically? Alexander asked. Not conclusively, Marcus said, though given how public your rescue occurred, in a parking garage with witnesses present, it's likely only a matter of time before he identifies the connection. If he hasn't already begun suspecting it. Alexander considered this troubling development carefully, his sharp mind already working through the various implications and necessary precautions this revelation demanded. Increase security around the estate immediately, he said, and I want continuous monitoring of Victor's movements and communications, discreetly but thoroughly. Understood, sir, Marcus said, though he hesitated before departing. Sir, if I may ask, given the additional complexity this situation now presents, are you certain continuing to protect Grace remains the wisest course of action for our organization's broader interests? Alexander studied his security chief carefully, understanding the legitimate concern underlying Marcus's careful question. I understand the risk this represents, Marcus, but abandoning Grace now, after everything she's already suffered, isn't a choice I'm willing to make simply because circumstances have grown more complicated than initially anticipated. Marcus nodded, genuine respect evident in his expression despite his earlier pragmatic concerns. Understood, sir. I'll ensure our security measures reflect the increased seriousness of this situation. Meanwhile, across the city, Victor Hale sat in his private office, increasingly frustrated by his unsuccessful search for his missing wife. 3 days had passed since Grace's disappearance, and despite considerable resources dedicated toward locating her, he'd found nothing concrete beyond confirmation that she'd fled directly into the vicinity of a business meeting hosted by Alexander Steele's organization. Tell me everything about Steele, Victor demanded of his private investigator, a man named Frank Dolinsky, who had proven reliable during previous, less legitimate investigations Victor had required over the years. He's dangerous, Frank said carefully. Controls significant territory throughout the city, considerable resources and connections. If your wife is genuinely under his protection, retrieving her won't be simple or without significant risk. I don't care about risk. Victor snapped, his controlled businessman facade slipping slightly to reveal the genuine, dangerous anger underlying his carefully maintained public persona. She belongs to me. I won't allow some criminal boss to simply steal what's mine. With respect, Frank said carefully, understanding the genuine danger inherent in contradicting Victor's obvious fury. Confronting Steele directly, without proper preparation and resources, would likely result in considerable harm to yourself rather than successfully reclaiming your wife. Victor's jaw tightened with obvious frustration, though genuine calculation was evident beneath his anger. Then I'll need additional resources, he said finally. Resources that can properly match whatever protection Steele has extended toward Grace. What kind of resources are you considering? Frank asked cautiously. Victor considered his answer carefully before responding. Understanding the genuine risk inherent in revealing his connection to considerably more dangerous business partners than his legitimate restaurant chain typically suggested. I have contacts within an organization capable of matching Steele's resources directly. I'll need to call in favors I've been accumulating for exactly this kind of situation. Frank's expression carried genuine unease at this revelation, understanding intuitively that Victor's connections likely extended into territory considerably more dangerous than his investigation work typically involved. Are you certain that's wise, sir? Escalating this situation by involving additional criminal organizations seems considerably more dangerous than simply accepting the loss and moving forward with your life. She's my wife, Victor said firmly, genuine possessive anger evident beneath his controlled tone. I built my entire life around controlling every aspect of our marriage precisely as I intended. I won't simply accept her escape as some kind of acceptable conclusion to years of careful investment in maintaining that control. Later that evening, Victor made a phone call to a contact within the Kozlov organization, carefully outlining his situation and requesting the kind of assistance that would allow him to successfully locate and reclaim Grace despite whatever protection Alexander Steele's organization had extended toward her. The ID Kozlov representative listened carefully to Victor's explanation, recognizing immediately the potential strategic value this situation might offer their organization's ongoing territorial conflicts with Alexander Steele's operations. "We can assist," the representative said finally, "though understand this assistance comes with expectations regarding your continued cooperation and loyalty toward our organization's broader interests." "Whatever you need," Victor said immediately, desperate enough to reclaim control over his wife that he barely considered the genuine danger inherent in deepening his entanglement with an organization considerably more ruthless than his previous limited involvement had exposed him to. "We'll need detailed information about Steele's estate, his security patterns, anything that might help us locate exactly where your wife is currently being protected," the representative continued. "In exchange, we'll provide the resources and manpower necessary to successfully retrieve her, regardless of whatever protection Steele has extended," as Victor ended the call, satisfaction evident in his expression despite the genuine danger he'd just invited into an already complicated situation. He had no understanding of exactly how significantly this decision would escalate the conflict between himself, Alexander Steele's organization, and the considerably more dangerous forces now becoming directly involved in his desperate attempt to reclaim what he considered rightfully his. Back at Alexander's estate, unaware of the dangerous alliance now forming against her, Grace continued her slow, careful recovery, cautiously allowing herself to trust the genuine safety and protection Alexander had extended, unaware that the danger she'd fled was about to become considerably more complicated and severe than even her worst fears about Victor's potential retaliation had previously suggested. Over the following 2 weeks, Grace's physical recovery progressed steadily under the estate's careful medical care, though the deeper psychological healing from years of sustained abuse proved considerably more gradual. Alexander made a point of visiting her regularly, their conversations slowly evolving from careful, cautious exchanges into something resembling genuine friendship built on mutual respect and increasing trust. "You seem different today," Grace observed one afternoon as they sat together in the estate's quiet garden, the autumn air carrying a pleasant, crisp quality that made the outdoor setting particularly appealing during her continued recovery. "How so?" Alexander asked, genuine curiosity evident in his tone. "More relaxed," Grace said, studying him carefully. "During our first conversations, you carried this careful, controlled quality, like you were constantly calculating and assessing everything around you. Today feels different." Alexander considered her observation thoughtfully before responding. "Perhaps I am more relaxed," he acknowledged. "Your presence here has become considerably less stressful than I initially anticipated. When I made the admittedly unconventional decision to bring a stranger into my home," Grace smiled softly at his careful honesty, "I imagine I've disrupted your usual careful routines considerably." "Some disruptions prove worthwhile," Alexander said simply, something warm evident beneath his typically controlled expression. Their conversation drifted naturally into more personal territory as the afternoon progressed, Grace finding herself genuinely curious about the complicated man who had extended such unexpected protection and kindness despite his dangerous reputation and business. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said finally. "Of course," Alexander said. "How did someone end up running an organization like yours?" Grace asked carefully. "You don't seem like the ruthless criminal your reputation might suggest. At least not based on how you've treated me." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering how much of his own difficult history he felt comfortable sharing. "My father built this organization from considerable poverty and desperation," he said finally. "Growing up, I watched him navigate violence and danger constantly, understanding from a young age that this life would eventually become my inheritance, whether I genuinely wanted it or not." "Did you want it?" Grace asked. "Not initially," Alexander admitted honestly. "I spent my early 20s trying desperately to build a different life, legitimate business ventures, distance from my father's dangerous world. But circumstances eventually forced my hand, requiring me to fully embrace leadership of this organization to protect people I genuinely cared about from considerable danger." "That sounds difficult," Grace said quietly, genuine sympathy evident in her tone. "It was," Alexander acknowledged, "though I've made peace with the complicated nature of my chosen path over the years. I try to ensure my organization operates with some measure of principle, protecting those genuinely deserving of protection, even within business that often requires difficult, morally complicated decisions." Grace studied him carefully, appreciating the genuine honesty evident in his careful explanation. "Is that why you helped me?" "Because protecting people fits into this principle you've tried maintaining." Alexander considered her question seriously before answering. "Partially," he said, "though I won't pretend my motivation remained purely principled and detached. Something about your genuine fear that night, combined with your obvious resilience despite everything you'd clearly endured, affected me considerably more personally than simple principle alone typically influences my decisions." Something warm settled in Grace's chest at his honest admission, an unfamiliar but genuinely welcome sensation after years of learning to distrust any indication of genuine care or affection from anyone in her life. Their growing connection continued, deepening over the following days. Alexander making time for regular visits despite his considerable business obligations. Grace finding herself genuinely anticipating these conversations with increasing warmth rather than the cautious uncertainty that had characterized their earlier interactions. Meanwhile, Victor's dangerous alliance with the Kozlov organization had begun yielding concerning results. Frank Dolinsky, working alongside Kozlov's more resourceful investigators, had successfully traced Grace's likely location through careful analysis of Alexander's public business dealings and known property holdings. "We've narrowed it down to 3 possible locations," Frank reported to Victor during a tense meeting in Victor's private office. "Steele's primary estate remains the most likely possibility, given the timing and circumstances of her disappearance." "How confident are you in this assessment?" Victor asked, genuine impatience evident in his tone. "Reasonably confident," Frank said carefully, "though confirming her exact location within Steele's property and successfully retrieving her, given his considerable security measures, remains a significantly more complicated undertaking." Victor's Kozlov contact, a calculating woman named Elena Vasquez, entered the conversation at this point, her expression carrying the particular calculated confidence of someone accustomed to successfully navigating dangerous, complicated operations. "We have resources capable of managing Steele's security measures," she said simply, "though executing this retrieval successfully will require careful timing and considerable coordination." "How long until you're prepared to move?" Victor asked, genuine desperation evident beneath his controlled businessman exterior. "Within the week," Elena said. "We're finalizing details regarding Steele's security patterns and identifying the optimal timing for minimizing resistance during our approach." Victor felt genuine satisfaction at this progress, though something uncomfortable lingered beneath his obvious relief at finally approaching successful resolution to his wife's unacceptable escape. He pushed aside whatever hesitation remained, focusing instead on the eventual satisfaction of successfully reclaiming complete control over Grace's life once again. back at Alexander's estate. Unaware of the increasingly imminent danger approaching her temporary sanctuary, Grace continued her gradual healing, allowing herself increasingly genuine hope regarding both her physical safety and the unexpected. Complicated connection developing between herself and the powerful, principled man who had so unexpectedly rescued her. "I've been thinking," Grace said one evening, as they shared dinner together in the estate's smaller, more intimate dining room, rather than the formal space typically reserved for Alexander's business associates. "About what happens after this. Once Victor's threat is properly resolved, I mean. What are you considering?" Alexander asked carefully. "I'm not certain yet," Grace admitted honestly. "Part of me wants to simply rebuild my life independently, prove to myself I'm capable of genuine strength and self-sufficiency after years of feeling powerless within my marriage. But another part of me," she paused, genuine vulnerability evident in her expression. "Another part of me has grown genuinely attached to the connection we've built here, and I'm uncertain how to reconcile those seemingly competing desires." Alexander studied her carefully, something warm and cautiously hopeful evident beneath his typically controlled expression. "Those desires don't necessarily need to compete against each other," he said gently. "Genuine independence and meaningful connection can coexist. Grace, I certainly don't expect or require you to sacrifice your own healing and self-discovery simply to maintain whatever connection we've developed." "I appreciate that," Grace said softly, genuine gratitude evident in her expression. "Though I'll admit, imagining a future without your presence in it feels considerably less appealing than it probably should, given how recently we've actually known each other." Something genuinely warm passed between them in that quiet moment, an acknowledgement of the unexpected, complicated connection that had developed from such frightening, unlikely circumstances. Neither of them could have anticipated how dramatically that fragile, growing connection would soon be tested by the dangerous confrontation rapidly approaching their carefully protected sanctuary. Marcus's warning came just after midnight, his urgent knock pulling Alexander from sleep with the immediate alertness of someone accustomed to sudden crisis. "Sir," Marcus said, his expression carrying genuine alarm despite his professional composure, "we've detected unusual activity along the estate's eastern perimeter. Multiple vehicles, consistent with a coordinated approach rather than casual passers-by." Alexander was already moving, pulling on clothes while his mind raced through necessary preparations. "How many?" "Our count suggests at least 15 individuals," Marcus said grimly. "Weapons visible during our surveillance team's brief observation before they retreated to maintain their cover." "Kozlov," Alexander said, understanding immediately that his earlier concerns about Victor's dangerous alliance had proven entirely justified. "Increase security around Grace's location immediately. I want her moved to the estate's secure safe room." "Already in progress, sir," Marcus confirmed. "Though given their apparent numbers and coordination, I'm concerned our current security detail may prove insufficient for a sustained confrontation. Call in additional resources," Alexander instructed. "Everyone available within reasonable distance. This ends tonight, one way or another." As Alexander moved quickly toward the estate's central security office, coordinating his organization's defensive response with practiced efficiency, despite the genuine danger rapidly escalating around them, Grace was being guided urgently through the estate's corridors toward the reinforced safe room Alexander had specifically designed for exactly this kind of emergency scenario. "What's happening?" Grace asked, genuine terror evident in her voice as she recognized the pattern of urgent, careful movements surrounding her. "Victor's found us," the guard escorting her said carefully, clearly reluctant to alarm her further but understanding she deserved honest information given the circumstances. "Mr. Steele is handling the situation, but we need you secured immediately." Grace felt genuine panic building rapidly in her chest. Years of learned fear regarding Victor's dangerous temper resurging powerfully. despite the weeks of careful healing she'd experienced under Alexander's protection. "Is Alexander safe?" "He's very capable, ma'am," the guard reassured her, though genuine tension remained evident in his careful tone. "Please, we need to move quickly." Outside, the first exchange of gunfire erupted along the estate's eastern perimeter as Victor's Kozlov-backed forces attempted their coordinated approach. Alexander's security team, though initially caught somewhat off guard by the timing of the assault, responded with disciplined, practiced efficiency, their defensive positions holding firm despite the attackers' considerable numbers. Victor himself remained positioned safely behind his hired forces, watching the unfolding confrontation with a mixture of genuine anxiety and desperate determination. Elena Vasquez, coordinating the Kozlov contribution to this assault, moved with calculated precision alongside her own experienced operatives. "Your intelligence about their security patterns proved accurate," Elena observed coolly as the assault progressed. "Though Steele's defensive response is considerably more organized than our initial assessment suggested. Just get me my wife," Victor said, genuine desperation evident beneath his attempted composure. "Whatever resistance Steele's people offer, I need Grace secured before this confrontation concludes." The battle continued escalating as both sides committed increasing resources to the confrontation. Alexander personally directing his organization's defensive strategy from the estate's central command, position while simultaneously coordinating additional reinforcements racing toward the property from throughout the city. "Sir," Marcus reported urgently, "they're attempting to breach the western gate. If they successfully penetrate that perimeter, they'll have direct access toward the main residence." "Redirect our reserve team immediately," Alexander commanded, his voice carrying controlled urgency despite the genuine severity of their situation. "I want that breach contained before they gain any further ground." Despite Alexander's organization's disciplined response, the Kozlov-backed forces gradually made concerning progress, their considerable numbers and coordinated tactics slowly overwhelming Alexander's initially strong defensive positions. Within 20 minutes, several attackers had successfully breached the western perimeter, moving with dangerous purpose toward the main residence. Alexander made a rapid, difficult decision. "I'm heading to the safe room personally," he told Marcus. "Continue coordinating our defense here, but I won't risk Grace's safety on the assumption our perimeter holds indefinitely." He moved quickly through the estate's corridors, several trusted guards accompanying him as he navigated toward the reinforced safe room, where Grace waited in genuine terror, listening to the distant but unmistakable sounds of ongoing, violent confrontation. When Alexander finally reached her, Grace's relief at seeing him unharmed was immediate and overwhelming, though genuine fear remained evident in her trembling hands and rapid breathing. "Is it over?" she asked desperately. "Not yet," Alexander admitted honestly, unwilling to offer false reassurance given the genuine severity of their continuing crisis. "But I won't let them reach you, Grace. I promise you that absolutely," before either of them could continue their conversation. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside the safe room sent immediate tension through Alexander's protective stance. He positioned himself directly between Grace and the entrance, weapon raised, prepared for whatever threat might emerge. The door opened cautiously, revealing not Kozlov's forces, but rather Marcus, his expression carrying urgent but genuinely hopeful information. "Sir, our reinforcements have arrived. We're pushing their forces back toward the perimeter now." Relief flooded through Alexander's chest, though he remained cautious given the ongoing nature of their crisis. "What about Victor specifically? Has he been located?" "He's positioned near the eastern tree line, sir, apparently coordinating from a safer distance rather than participating directly in the confrontation," Marcus reported. "I want him captured alive," Alexander said firmly. "Whatever else happens tonight, I need Victor Hale answering for everything he's done to Grace, properly and completely." As Alexander's reinforced security forces gradually gained the upper hand against the Kozlov-backed assault, Victor's carefully coordinated plan began unraveling rapidly. Elena Vasquez, recognizing the shifting balance clearly favoring Alexander's superior numbers and organization, made the pragmatic decision to withdraw her remaining forces rather than risk further significant losses. "We're retreating," she informed Victor sharply. "This operation has failed. Continuing would simply result in unnecessary casualties without any realistic possibility of successfully retrieving your wife." "No," Victor said desperately, genuine panic evident in his voice as his carefully planned reclamation of Grace collapsed rapidly around him. "We can't simply abandon this now, not when we've come this close." "This operation is finished," Elena said firmly, already directing her remaining operatives toward their planned retreat routes. "I'd suggest you consider your own immediate safety rather than continuing this increasingly hopeless pursuit." Victor remained frozen for several agonizing moments, torn between his desperate desire to reclaim control over Grace's life and the increasingly obvious reality that this confrontation had failed catastrophically. Finally, as Alexander's security forces continued advancing steadily toward his position, Victor made the reluctant decision to retreat alongside Elena's withdrawing forces. But Alexander's men had anticipated exactly this possibility. Additional forces positioned strategically to intercept exactly this kind of retreat attempt. As Victor attempted his desperate escape through the estate's eastern woodland, he found his path blocked decisively by Alexander's waiting security team. "It's over." "Victor," Marcus said calmly, his weapon raised with practiced steadiness, "you're not leaving this property tonight. At least not in the manner you were planning." Victor's expression shifted rapidly from desperate determination to genuine, cornered fear as he recognized the complete collapse of his carefully planned operation. "This isn't finished," he said weakly, though his voice carried little genuine conviction given his obviously compromised position. "For you, it very much is," Marcus said firmly, moving forward to properly secure Victor's surrender. The estate settled into quiet exhaustion in the hours following the confrontation's resolution. Alexander's security team secured the property completely, treating minor injuries among their own ranks while confirming the Kozlov-backed assault force had retreated entirely beyond estate boundaries. Victor remained detained in a secure section of the property, awaiting Alexander's decision regarding his ultimate fate. Alexander found Grace still in the safe room, having refused to leave until she received direct confirmation of his safety and the confrontation's genuine resolution. When he finally entered, exhaustion evident in his posture but relief clearly visible in his expression, Grace immediately crossed the room and embraced him tightly, genuine emotion overwhelming her careful composure. "You're safe," she said, her voice thick with relief. "I was so frightened something had happened to you." "I'm fine," Alexander reassured her, returning her embrace with genuine warmth. "Atadite. Victor's forces have been repelled completely. You're safe now, Grace, genuinely and permanently safe." "What about Victor himself?" Grace asked, pulling back slightly to study Alexander's expression carefully. "He's been captured," Alexander said. "I need to know what you want done with him, Grace. This decision should genuinely be yours, given everything you've suffered because of his actions." Grace considered this weighty decision carefully, memories of years of sustained abuse warring against her genuine desire to move forward, rather than remaining perpetually defined by Victor's cruelty. "I don't want him dead," she said finally, surprising herself slightly with the genuine conviction in her decision. "I've spent years living in fear of violence. I don't want my freedom to begin with more violence, even against someone who's caused me so much genuine suffering." "What would you prefer instead?" Alexander asked, genuine respect evident in his tone, despite what he might have considered a more decisive resolution to Victor's dangerous threat. "I want him to face genuine legal consequences," Grace said thoughtfully. "For the abuse, certainly, but also for his connections to Kozlov's criminal organization. I want him held properly accountable through legitimate channels, Not simply eliminated quietly. Alexander studied her carefully, genuine admiration evident in his expression at her thoughtful, principled response, despite the genuine trauma she'd experienced. "I can arrange that," he said. "Though understand, given his connections to organizations like Kozlov, ensuring genuine legal accountability will require careful, strategic handling of the evidence we've gathered. I trust you to handle it properly," Grace said, genuine confidence evident in her voice. Over the following weeks, Alexander's organization worked carefully to ensure Victor faced genuine legal consequences for both his abuse of Grace and his extensive criminal connections. Evidence was carefully compiled and anonymously provided to appropriate law enforcement channels, ensuring Victor's eventual prosecution proceeded through legitimate legal processes rather than simply disappearing into whatever fate Alexander's organization might have otherwise arranged. Victor was eventually convicted on multiple charges related to both his abuse and his money laundering connections to organized crime, sentenced to a lengthy prison term that ensured Grace's continued safety and freedom from his dangerous influence permanently. With Victor's threat genuinely resolved, Grace found herself facing the complicated question of exactly what her future should now hold. She had genuinely healed considerably during her time under Alexander's protection, both physically and psychologically, though she understood clearly that genuine independence required more than simply remaining permanently within his protective care. "I've been offered a position," she told Alexander one evening, several months after Victor's conviction had finally provided genuine closure to that difficult chapter of her life. A women's shelter downtown, helping other survivors of domestic abuse navigate exactly the kind of difficult, frightening transition I experienced myself. "That sounds like meaningful work," Alexander said, genuine support evident in his expression, despite what she suspected might be complicated feelings about her potential departure from his direct protection. "I want to take it," Grace said, "though I also want to be honest with you about something else." "What's that?" Alexander asked carefully. "I don't want this to mean leaving what we've built together," Grace said, genuine vulnerability evident in her voice. "These past months, getting to know you, building this connection despite everything else happening around us, it's become something genuinely important to me. I don't want independence and this relationship to feel mutually exclusive." Something warm and relieved passed across Alexander's expression at her honest admission. "I don't want that either," he said firmly. "Grace, I understand your need for independence, for proving to yourself you're capable of building a meaningful life on your own terms after everything Victor stole from you. But that independence doesn't need to mean distance between us. What are you suggesting?" Grace asked, genuine hope evident in her expression. "I'm suggesting we build something together," Alexander said carefully. "Not you dependent on my protection, but genuine partnership. Two people choosing each other freely rather than circumstances forcing dependency between us." Grace felt genuine happiness bloom in her chest at his careful, respectful proposal, understanding clearly the significant difference between the controlling, dependent relationship Victor had forced upon her and the genuine equal partnership Alexander was thoughtfully proposing instead. "I'd like that very much," she said, genuine warmth evident in her voice. A year later, Grace stood in the small women's shelter she now directed, watching a room full of survivors slowly building the same kind of genuine hope and healing she'd experienced herself following her own desperate escape from years of sustained abuse. Alexander arrived to collect her at the end of her workday, as had become their comfortable, established routine. Genuine happiness evident in both their expressions as they greeted each other. "How was your day?" he asked, gently taking her hand as they walked together toward his waiting car. "Meaningful," Grace said, genuine satisfaction evident in her voice. "We had 3 new arrivals today, each one reminding me considerably of myself just over a year ago. You're helping people in ways few others genuinely could," Alexander said, admiration evident in his tone. Your own experience gives you insight and empathy that professional training alone couldn't fully provide. Grace smiled softly, appreciating his genuine understanding of the meaningful purpose she'd found through her own painful experience. I never imagined that night I collapsed into your arms, completely terrified and broken that it would eventually lead me here, to this genuinely meaningful life I've built. Neither did I, Alexander admitted honestly, though I've never regretted the decision to help you that night. Regardless of the complications and danger that decision eventually brought into both our lives, as they settled into the car together, beginning their comfortable evening routine that had become such a meaningful part of both their lives, Grace reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from that desperate, frightened collapse into genuine safety, healing, and unexpected love. She had learned through considerable difficulty and genuine growth that true strength wasn't measured by never experiencing vulnerability or fear, but rather by the courage to seek help when genuinely needed, and the resilience to rebuild meaningful life afterward, despite whatever darkness had come before. Sometimes, Grace understood now with genuine clarity, the darkest nights of desperate fear and vulnerability led unexpectedly toward the most meaningful light, arriving not through avoiding danger entirely, but through the courage to trust genuine kindness when it appeared, even from the most unexpected sources.